Hey, this is Derek with the Make a Fun Island podcast. I'm here with CY Lee, who is an incredible technologist, entrepreneur. He's been a product manager for many different tech companies in kind of the consumer space with Microsoft, Amazon, Real Networks. He's also a self-described music nerd, and I'll let him talk more about that. And he's also been a broadcaster for student radio on MIT when he was back in college, and just an overall music fan and music aficionado. So welcome to the show, CY.
Hi, thanks, Derek. I think you undersell how we know each other, which is like an incredible story.
Yeah.
So when you say product manager at Microsoft, we crossed paths first time back at Microsoft.
Yes.
And,
do you want to say? So it's kind of funny because you kind of tagged me, I think, on Twitter somehow.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing the power of social networks, where we were in the Microsoft social network by virtue of being in the same sort of Exchange directory, and we worked together in Office at one point.
Okay,
back in the early sort of like Outlook, PowerPoint, Excel days.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I saw your name is very distinctive, and when it popped up in my radar, like some algorithm sort of like put you in above the fold, and I was like, wait, I know that
guy. Yeah. And so then I found out you were interested in Web3, NFT music stuff, which I'm loving right now. And just I started going down this rabbit hole about a year ago. I'm kind of late to the party, so you've been you've been at the party longer than I have. So I just wanted to kind of like start to talk to you a little bit about kind of the Web3 space for music, and kind of what you're seeing and who's doing interesting stuff. And I know you're working on some potential things. I don't know if you can share yet, but
yeah, I'd love to.
Yeah. So what do you think is going on right now with music and NFTs and Web3?
Music NFTs, I think, are particularly fascinating within the larger context of NFTs because it's the slowest moving medium in terms of, you think about PFP projects and like visual art NFTs. And music NFTs are sort of I wouldn't even call it a fast follow. It's a slow follow. But it's kind of, I think of it as like slow food. Like there's a time for everyone to sort of savor and figure out the environment as it's moving along. So whereas there's been a lot of like speculation and churn in crypto and the NFT markets in general, music, because of its complexity, because it has so much sort of legislative sort of like legacy and weight, it can't move at the same pace. And also music being a time-based medium, you can't just scan a bunch of bitmaps and be like, oh, that's the one I want to collect. It's more like, okay, let me hear these things. And so in some ways, I think the slower motion of music NFTs makes for a more sort of mature growth sort of vector for the people and the culture in that ecosystem. Because it's almost like we have patterns we can pick from to try following when we do experiments, as opposed to like making the same mistakes at the same time that cause bubbles to form and people to get scammed and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Not that we're absent from those, but it seems like, in my mind, it's kind of nice to be behind the curve to see what's happening and then figure out what we want to experiment with.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, because musicians, like if you're a music artist today, chances are you probably already have a fan base, even if it's small. And you're often thinking, okay, what percentage of my fan base has crypto and would be willing to go through the complexity of buying an NFT from me, right? And for most music artists, they're like, that sliver of fans for me is like zero or close to zero, whereas a lot of these visual artists who are like, in their late teens or 20 something, and they're like, I'm going to go crush it and make some profile pictures and put them on Magic Eden and whatever, and I'm going to make $1 million. Like there's a lot of people out there who want to do that in the visual space. But I think that artists, again, music artists are a little more practical, you know, and they're like, hey, I'm just trying to get onto a playlist on streaming on Spotify. I can't worry about the NFT space. So I think that's why it's a little slower moving.
Right.
That's kind of my assessment.
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. I think the other aspect of it is like the visual arts. It's very easy for people to create visual art.
That's true.
And in that sense, the people who got crypto and Web3 first,
Hmm.
it made it very easy for them to understand NFTs in the context of like, oh, these are like bitmaps, memes, things that I can see,
Yeah.
and thus start creating transactions around them. Whereas
Yes.
music has always had a complicated relationship with money and value.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, yeah, and that sort of gets carried across the line
Yeah.
along with the technology, like
Yeah.
the art and the culture itself is a lot. Yeah, it's a lot more to process.
Hmm.
But on the counterpoint, it is I think there's a lot more emotional depth, and there's a replayability aspect of music where you can sort of like run these emotions by yourself again and again. And I think there's emotive power to music that other art doesn't have, at least not in the
Hmm.
same way.
Yeah.
And that also makes the medium more complicated and hard to assess value on, and thus harder to trade.
Yeah. Yeah, and then even, I mean, even say with OpenSea and stuff, I've done some experiments with a few music artists myself, and like OpenSea had some sort of like ridiculous upload file size limit of like, 50 megabytes or something like that.
Yeah,
Where I'm
yeah,
like, as a music NFT, I want to have outtakes of my latest music video or something like that. I could have 2 gigabytes worth of stuff I want
hmm
to load up fans with, and there's like only a few platforms now that are emerging that would even allow that kind of thing to happen, and it's even all relatively new, like in the last year.
yeah,
So I feel like there's kind of an awareness around the needs of what music NFTs um, could even mean, right, for both
yeah.
the platform, the marketplaces, and then also for artists as well, and what they could use it for.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, which is, the common consumer understanding of music is what they hear on Spotify or the radio. It's a
Hmm.
polished, mixed, produced,
Hmm.
mastered content.
Yes.
Whereas outtakes, souvenirs, photos of live shows, photos in
Hmm.
the studio, those are all music NFTs, or they can be
Hmm.
broadly defined as like it's
Yeah.
merch.
Yeah.
Um, and in that sense, I feel like there's also been, a struggle around what is the definition of a music NFT? Is it the sort of like obvious skeuomorphic thing that it was in Web 2, Web 1, pre web, back when people were just like doing live performances? Or is
Hmm.
it something that is more broadly defined?
Hmm.
Which is that, it's a wonderful question, but it also makes people harder for people to get their heads around.
Hmm. Yeah. And so tell me, like you've said in the past, I think you've had a good definition for artists of how they should think about what an NFT is and what it should be, what it should offer. And I
Yep.
think you were using the analogy of like MTV Cribs. So like if you're telling an artist today like what they should do in terms of like starting to offer NFTs, what would you tell them?
Yeah, I think of like music NFTs or music in general is a great way for people to express their identity. And people have
Hmm.
done this for years. If you look at any teenage bedroom
Hmm.
from decades past, it's like a mishmash of like, vinyl, cassettes, instruments, posters on the walls, like memorabilia. That's sort of the initial
Yeah.
way that sort of people find their identity separate from their parents as they're growing up. And this is really, I think, the power of music at a very low base human level, which is
Yeah.
that is the first way that people start separating themselves from kind of the adults in their lives and bonding
Yeah.
with their peers,
Yeah. Good
because it's a
point.
shared it's an incredible shared context, and it
Yeah.
sets this I think of it as a scene
Hmm.
that forms when you're in like like elementary or middle or high school, when you start really getting your head sucked into music.
Hmm.
So it comes to like this music nerd I mean, music, the concept of music nerd has been around forever, but I really love it because it's, yes, music touches everyone and that's beautiful. But there's a certain strata of people for whom music is such a core part of their identity
Hmm.
that they invest an unreasonable amount of like time, resources, money, whatever, in this passion. Yeah.
Raising my
And,
hand here.
and, and frankly, I think these are the people that like both serve the culture and which culture ultimately should aim to serve, in the
Yeah.
sense that like if you're serving music nerds, everything else you're making culture and everyone can indulge in that culture because it's just
Yeah.
so universal.
Yeah.
Um, and, and yeah, so I feel like the MTV Cribs reference is a lot of like, at least for me, when I saw MTV Cribs, it sort of set this sort of like high watermark for what it means to be a music nerd. You go to an artist's house, by
Hmm.
definition, like they made it their career. There is no more apex music nerd than someone who wants to make a living doing it, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they'll take you into their house, and there's always like, stuff on the wall that for some people it's like, platinum records. For other people it's like concert posters for tours they've been on. But
Yeah.
then you see just like the trappings of a world of music that they're involved in
Hmm.
just in their environment. It is
Yeah.
just like such a part of their identity. And they spend, for however long they have, like 10 minutes talking about, hey, this is my house. But it's almost always from the perspective of like the music lifestyle as defined by that environment that they've made their house.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like, this is every music nerd at some point wants to express their identity based on the music that they indulge in most. And, short of inviting people over to your house to see your music room, that's
Hmm.
really hard, except now we have the internet. People have profiles and social media. People can find each other online. How is that music nerdness
Yeah.
expressed in a way where everyone can just kind of consume it as just part of like, oh, here's their profile pic. Here's their profile, self-described profile. Here's some recent photos of them like doing the things they love.
Hmm.
Um, where's the music part? And I feel like
Right.
that's sort of an identity that everyone has, that there's room for expression for it.
Yeah.
And music NFTs tie into that in a really beautiful way.
Yeah. And imagine having like a track like on your Twitter profile that nobody else has,
Yeah.
right? An
Yeah.
unreleased track of some artist that people love or whatever. Like, I mean,
Right.
that's
You're like
crazy.
signaling I go deep. Like this is
Right.
like how far I am down the rabbit hole. And other music nerds who see that will know. It's almost
Yeah.
like a coded language. It's like
Yeah.
fashion. Like if you walk around any place where there's a critical mass of like young people who are expressing themselves in how they carry themselves and what they wear and the
Yeah.
accessories that like that, if you don't know, you don't know. But if you
Yeah.
know, you know. Right.
Right.
And that's this beautiful, beautiful thing about music is like every part of music goes super deep. Like if you're
Yeah.
thinking about stems, if you're thinking about like early primordial influences on that artist that everyone sort of like knows now,
Right.
but it's a level of credibility and sort of attachment that music
Hmm.
nerds have with each other that I think is really, really great.
Yeah, and wasn't that kind of the problem with did you follow the whole Ticketmaster debacle with Taylor Swift, this last year?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I mean, I think that was kind of the beef, right? Is that a lot of her hardcore fans thought they could get kind of first access to tour tickets with Ticketmaster, and then all these other, scalpers and stuff were coming in and sweeping up tickets, and then
Mm-hmm.
her hardest core fans couldn't get them. And I mean, NFTs would solve this like so well, right? Because she could offer an NFT to those hardcore fans. They could hold that, and then if
Yeah.
you were an owner of that NFT of like, whatever that means for Taylor Swift, she could make sure that like the link could go out to that set of fans first. So,
Yeah.
what? Tell me, what do you know anything more about that whole situation? Did you follow it?
Well, I do it very broad terms.
Yeah.
I mean, but I think it brings up maybe how do you validate evidence that someone's a true fan? And
Yes.
if there was a way for Taylor to have eyes in each person's sort of like house where they could see the amount of Taylor Swift merch they'd accumulated over the past,
Right.
over their entire life knowing music,
Yeah.
then it'd be like, okay, you must have like, these number of items and this number of shirts that have this amount of wear patterns on them in
Yeah.
order to be eligible to buy these tickets, right? Not that that can't be gamed, but like,
Yeah.
like collections of NFTs, I think really help express, like the things that you've chosen to collect, either because it was gamified and it's just hard to get, or you paid like big money for, to
Yeah.
express how big a fan you are. And then, obviously can build stuff around that. That's a lot more credible than like, did you show up and, get on the website at this time with a number of sort of like obstacles that we meet
Right.
up.
Yeah, and I think I mean, I think just what you said is important to stress of like, digitally being able to verify that, right? Like you can walk into somebody's house, like you said, and see all the Taylor Swift paraphernalia, and you'll know they're a hardcore fan, but you
Yeah.
can't do that when you're trying, when Ticketmaster's trying to sell tickets. And so like this is where NFTs really shine, because now we can digitally verify like, oh, you have that NFT or these 3 or 5 or whatever. You
Yep.
are a hardcore Taylor Swift fan. And it was hard to get those, right? Or you have to be there first. You have to buy them from
Right.
somebody else,
Right.
whatever. And we could potentially even know what you paid for them.
Right.
Yeah. So like, that's really the crux of where NFTs, I think, really solve the problem.
Yeah, yeah. I think the other amazing thing, along the lines of those problems, like the same visibility that a Ticketmaster or ticketing company might have to validate looking in your wallet to see what kind of prerequisites you have as a fan,
Yeah.
extend out to other humans. Like other people can look in your wallet and validate, oh, I have that NFT too, and you feel that connection. So whether those connections are made through like machine learning that operates by scraping like collections of wallets, or just people organically, hey, I just met someone, and knowing that they've got a .eth address that maps to a wallet. There's a whole section of how people see each other, a whole sort of category of how people see each other, which is still super nascent. That UX does not exist yet. But at some point, like I think, NFTs are in wallets that are ultimately visible to anybody. It's no different from walking around at the mall as a teenager.
Yeah.
If I'm taking it back to a 90s analogy, and you see another person with that, Cure like t-shirt from the tour that you were on, and you kind of like,
oh yeah,
like, you
right.
make eye contact, and
yeah,
who
right.
they are, and they know who
Right.
you are.
Yeah.
And so wallets have that same sort of, they have all the data that makes those physics possible. We just haven't built them yet. Like, I think that's where the tech and the UX and ultimately, culture still haven't developed to the point where it becomes universal. Like I would think as a parallel, like the people who are playing Destiny together, and this is kind of taken into the game scene, like at some level, everyone who agrees to play Fortnite together or Destiny or any of these massively multiplayer games, they're all on the same page about like what's precious, what's rare, what flair means what. And we don't have that yet in the massively multiplayer game we call NFTs.
Yes,
And
right.
like that's a beautiful thing, because we're making it up right now.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you too, this leads into like who's creating interesting platforms right now? Who's doing interesting stuff in your mind?
Well, the beautiful thing is this is so decentralized that there's beautiful stuff to be done all over the place. But there is no one entity. Like I think about how Facebook portrayed itself when it rebranded as Meta.
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, we've got it all figured out. You put it in the headset, you go hang out in these spaces, you see each other, and then you can like wear things. And it's like, that's like it's being presented with like a finished, polished solution that everyone is like, that's weird.
Right.
So I feel like, like, yes, there are marketplaces that are on the come up. Like I really like Sound XYZ. I really like Catalog as marketplaces. And then I really like, Rainbow Wallet. I really like Super Collector. I really like what I'm building, as sort of like these initial ventures into like showing music nerds or like people who are collecting what each other have. And finding similarities, and there's DAOs that are coming together where people who are aligned with goals are using NFTs. So I think about like Nouns, and then there's a Nouns builder that Zora's got together. They're all these sort of like basic tools for forming scenes, because you need like the things, the culture, the financial things, and like the tools
Yeah.
to make a scene happen. And I think the best, like at some point there will be I think of it as like a pop art moment where
Hmm.
Andy Warhol under the factory put together a critical mass of like people making cool shit and
Hmm.
collectors collecting cool shit. And then there's a
Hmm.
whole music and art and interesting people and interesting characters sort of scene that eventually gained the momentum where that scene could be seen from the outside. It's like, oh, those people are doing cool things.
Yeah.
And eventually it like people were like, oh yeah, I'll buy that stupid silk screen picture of a Campbell's soup can for ridiculous money because I saw that other person doing it and they seem like they know what they're doing. Like
Hmm.
that's the game. There's nobody building the game all at once. It's
Yeah.
all these people doing things that are part of it that ultimately I do think there's going to be something that kind of like comes up that sort of like makes everything align and makes sense. But
Yeah.
it's not somebody masterminding it.
Yeah, and honestly, that's what kind of excited me this last year as I started learning more about the space. I think it was a year ago I started doing a series on my YouTube channel. Actually, I guess it's part of the podcast too. Is like what I call my NFT journey, where I literally knew nothing, and I was like starting to record my thoughts and like
Yeah.
experiments and screen sharing, and I'm like, even in the last year, I've learned so much, and I realized like, oh my goodness, I'm early. This is amazing. Like I'm still early. And like,
Yeah.
and you know, you and I have been in the technology field for long enough that we've seen these giant waves of innovation, right? Of like, you know, the rise of the internet in the early to mid 90s, and then, you know, the rise of search, you know, with Google coming online, and then Amazon with e-commerce, and then Wi-Fi and mobile, and then social. And like, these are huge waves of innovation that have created literally trillions of dollars of value. And I feel like we're in one of those waves now. It's just
Oh, yeah.
started. You know, it started to hit like 2021. Like that's, you know, the craze, the NFT craze. And
Yep.
of course, Bitcoin started it all back in, I don't know, 2009 or something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And,
No,
and yeah.
I feel like what you're describing there is like a really great parallel because that's sort of like the lead up to the late '90s, that .com boom,
Yeah. Hmm.
is a feels so familiar to me. Where
Yes.
there's a point where technology becomes useful and then mainstream, and then culture starts bending to and bending with
Hmm.
technology, and then technology starts bending with culture. Uh,
Yes.
and yeah, it feels like we're there, and like
Yes.
ideas are forming, but we're not mass marketing. So I would compare it to like, Amazon started with books in like, the mid late
Hmm.
90s.
Yeah.
But people were dialing in. So you can see bitmaps
Mhm.
of book covers, which are like tiny. It's like, okay, that's reasonable to shop for that. But until broadband was ubiquitous and people were like downloading detailed pictures of clothing that they could zoom in and to see patterns, like
Right.
it, it felt ridiculous to think, oh, I wouldn't buy anything that's not already an understood, music or
Right.
book or thing that I could go and look at it in the store and be like, oh yeah, that is exactly what I want.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So I started getting super excited this year of realizing like I'm early. I can get in on this and like really start to like think about the future and help innovate and design and things like that. So
Yeah.
speaking of design, so let's talk about what you're working on. So
Yeah.
can you share or like at
Yeah.
least the
I'd love
problem
to.
space or something?
So the problem I'm trying to solve, and I've been working on this with my co-founder Carl. It's close to a decade now.
Hmm.
But the general problem is, how do you get people from liking a song to liking an artist to financially supporting an artist?
Mm-hmm.
And that I think is an important part of just like making it possible for artists to make a living without
Yes.
having to sign to a label and without like betting that they're going to be able to sell millions or stream millions. Actually, at
Yeah.
this point, probably a billion streams in order to make a living.
Yeah.
Um, and we started thinking about it from the perspective of like the user experience is the right now the most broken part. And it still is the most broken part
Hmm. Hmm.
of that guides how people think about music.
Yeah.
Because the streaming UIs as they are now are focused on getting people to stay subscribed. So it's like, how can we deliver the most music we can to you that you'll want, such that you won't think about canceling?
Yeah.
That's sort of the goal, as opposed to, how do you get individuals who are inclined to support artists?
Hmm.
And so, for the past since 2013, we've been building sort of different mobile apps that sort of explore what it means to go through that workflow of liking a song, to liking an artist, to supporting that artist.
Mm.
So at sort of the peak of that app, we built something that was a merge of basically SoundCloud and Instagram. And
Okay.
it
Yeah.
was it allowed people to rip through their SoundCloud sort of like feeds with the context of that artist who made it,
Hmm.
while looking at whatever they post on Instagram. So you get to
Hmm.
know the artist, like as they express themselves on social media while listening to their music, which we thought was like,
Hmm.
okay, this is critical. Like right now, it's so hard to do that,
Yeah.
unless you're a music nerd and you're like willing to go and open a browser and or open Instagram, search for that
Hmm.
artist, hope you find them. Like there's a bunch of work that the
Hmm.
persona that we're trying to address,
Yeah.
ultimately me, but I think music nerds in general, will do to sort of figure out who is this person who makes this amazing stuff that I'm listening
Hmm.
to right now.
Right.
So we've been trying to essentially build that thing that makes it easy to do, to do and get that context that the music nerds search for, which is like,
Hmm.
who's this amazing person? What else have they made? How do I help them make more? Right.
Hmm. Got you. Yeah.
And so what Music Nerd is right now, as we've entered Web3, is it's a directory. And that sounds mundane, but if you think about
Hmm.
early internet, what really made it work for so many people was Yahoo, which if you think
Yeah.
about early Yahoo, it was a directory. What websites can I go to if I'm interested in like cross stitch knitting or
Yeah.
like, antique cars
Cars.
or
Yeah.
whatever that might be?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the directory that Music Nerd is, and you can go to Music Nerd at musicnerd.xyz. It is a crowdsourced directory of artists and collectors. So
Hmm.
if you look up an artist, by their name, basically, if they've published anything on Spotify or if they've made music NFTs, you'll
Hmm.
find them and then see alongside their profile stuff like, if they're on Wikipedia, you'll see that. If they're on
Hmm.
Instagram, you'll see that. TikTok, YouTube, Bandcamp, Patreon.
Mm.
The Web3 properties like Catalog, Sound, OpenSea, Zora. It's basically the tabs you would have open if you found somebody whose music you loved and you were like, okay, where else can I find them?
Yeah.
And the powerful thing about being crowdsourced is that like the only people who will add things are either like the artists themselves or music nerds who care about them.
Hmm.
And so ultimately, I feel like having this directory, it's the core of the CRM that's going to be necessary for people to find each other and ultimately transact with each other in terms of like collecting NFTs and seeing who else has collected those NFTs and seeing who's offering NFTs, and for
Yeah.
artists like seeing who's collected their NFTs and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's the germ. That's the basic part of what I'm
Okay.
building.
Yeah, got you. Yeah, and I think a lot of artists and don't really even understand how the current mechanisms are not in their favor, right? Like the whole beauty of, like you said, getting fans to start to support artists directly, um, is, just a simple concept of, marketing, direct to consumer, right? And like
Yep.
the current streaming models don't do that at all. Like Spotify, Apple Music, they're trying to get you to pay Spotify and Apple Music, right? And then the money from fans, from subscriptions and ads all go into to Spotify and Apple, and then it's divvied up according to amount of plays. And the funny thing is, it's kind of like having a pinball table that's like slightly slanted in a direction where it all goes to the major labels, and
Yeah.
then as an independent artist, right?
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
you're getting drained. And so the beauty of this Web3 and NFT space, and say like your directory, is like now we can make those hookups to artists directly, and that just needs to be happening a lot more than it
Yeah.
does, right?
Yeah. I think what's becoming visible as we've kind of like gone into these, it's almost been like 10 years of Spotify, if not more. I
Yeah.
think it's actually 15 years. But Spotify is really it's distribution.
Hmm.
It's and in some sense, I think of the $10 that people pay for Spotify, it's more like paying Comcast, $50 or $100 to get bandwidth into your house.
Yeah.
And sure, Spotify is building an amazing UI,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's basically like just to help you find music. It's not actually like the function of Spotify is not to get artists paid at this point. Just like
No.
the function of Comcast is not to get Amazon paid or any small
Right.
business on the internet paid. It's a
Yes.
transport.
Yes.
So each I think each creator, I'll generalize it, is sort of ultimately responsible for finding their audience. And Web3 makes it a lot easier, right, to have more expensive SKUs to offer to the audience that's truly engaged and believes in them. So like the one thing that's terrible about Spotify is that they've sort of made $9.99 a month a thing. The same way iTunes made 99 cents a track a thing. The same way CDs were $15 a CD is a thing.
Yeah.
And all along, like the consumer is always like, oh, and that money's going to the artist, right? Like, no, that CD you bought for $15, that artist still unrecouped. Sorry, that's
Right.
like going nowhere. Right?
Yeah. Right.
I think it's not like it's ever been different. But now we have tools for artists to make things that, once they have direct contact with their fans, to offer the fans a way to support them directly. And one could argue that Bandcamp has been doing this for years.
Yeah.
Right. Because if like the whole concept behind Bandcamp Friday, and there's been interesting tools built, like Hype Machine has a tool where you can like scrape all your Spotify songs that you love, and it'll find you the corresponding Bandcamp accounts for the artists that are on Bandcamp.
Yeah.
Right. And you can support them directly. But there's no specific culture around that. There's no tools. Like Spotify is not going to try to direct you to that artist's Bandcamp to be like, okay, we've seen you've been playing them a lot. Why don't you go and buy their stuff on Bandcamp?
Yeah.
But as soon as an artist can communicate with their audience directly and offer them things like, hey, if you just love my stuff, you can collect an NFT, and it's very inexpensive for the people who are just like young and broke but have infinite time to listen to music, or maybe the longtime fans and people who really appreciate that they're up and coming. Maybe their mom can buy like the $1,000 NFT. That's like meaningful support for them going forward. And so there is no primitive in NFTs where things are either like 99 cents or $15. We're making that up right now.
Yeah, it's the Wild West.
This amazing sort of spectrum of possibility.
Yeah, and it changes the nature of the game, because one thing I've felt kind of frustrated with over the past 10 years since Spotify arrived, and we all saw this coming, but now it's every artist that I meet, they're like, hey, Derek, can you help me get on playlists? And I'm like thinking, no, I don't want to help you do that. I want to help you create a fan base who's going to pay you. And so it's that classic notion of like, you'd rather now, I think, have 1,000 passionate fans than 1 million dispassionate fans who couldn't give a rip about you. Yeah. And they're all listening to Beyonce and all the money's going to her on Spotify anyway, you know, like. And so this is what I love about how this new world, we need to change how we think about what it means to make money as an artist. And I think it's kind of funny, because when you look back, speaking of kind of old school, like visual artists like Andy Warhol or something like that, he'd rather have like a few rich patrons, right? So he can just create whatever the heck he wants and offend whoever he wants or whatever, right? And like, he's good. And like, in a way, we want all artists to kind of think that way. Of course, you want more than a few patrons, right? So you don't have all your eggs in one basket. But now, like you're saying, because there's no rules now with Web3, there's going to be all these different revenue sources that we can think up and dream. Playlisting will be one aspect to it, but then there'll be others as well.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's super, super exciting. Like what realm of possibilities we have. But the problem still exists. Like, how is that creator, that artist, going to find their, 10, 100, and 1,000 true fans? But I think that what the definition of true fan, or as I think in the music realm, the music nerd, it's becoming more and more crisp, because it's now meaning like, okay, find those people who believe in you the most and have the capacity to support you directly.
Yes.
And I think that identity of that person, it used to be like, a Medici type patron, but now it's like anybody who loves something enough to pay some amount of money can be essentially a patron.
Yeah.
Essentially a micro patron. And I love how like both Bandcamp and Patreon have sort of like built frameworks around that.
Yes.
Web3 makes it like a lot more possible to create new definitions of people being able to be like, oh yeah, I support this creator that I believe in. I support them at a level that doesn't seem ostentatious. Right?
Yeah. And it democratizes it and formalizes it, in a transaction that now can be verified over time, right? Where like today with Patreon and things, it's opaque. The only person that knows who the supporters are just the artists themselves. Where now we can know, hey, CY likes, this band. I do too, like you're saying. And then now we have a connection to each other as well. Right. And then that becomes exciting. Yeah.
So in some sense, it sort of decentralizes the responsibility of the artist to create this like hub and spoke model of like, I am this creator and here are my fans. And I have like this, it's like a hierarchy or a tiered thing. Fans can now find each other. Yeah. And kind of form up on their own, in addition to the artist being sort of the focal point of what they're forming up around.
Yeah. And that creates more value for the artist, for the artist to foster that kind of environment. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So it's sort of like the like Spotify and playlisting and that stuff doesn't need to go away. I think it's still necessary to create a larger sort of like cultural impact of their work. And that creates sort of like the net mimetic value of that artist's art ultimately boosts the value of the NFTs that people have collected. I mean, that's what PFPs have sort of, that's the hypothesis they're sort of proving out. Yeah. But yeah, I think I don't think of NFTs as disrupting anything. It's more of a new adjunct revenue stream alongside, say, like, physical merch, live streaming, live performance,
vinyl,
streaming, vinyl, physical media. Yeah. It's just yet another thing. And for some number of creators, this makes a lot more sense than, say, like going on tour. So it's like a portfolio of ways to monetize that'll be specific to each creator as they find resonance with their audience.
Very true. Very true. Yeah. Well, great, CY. It's been awesome having you on the show, man. I look forward to seeing how you're going to be advancing musicnerd.xyz even more. I'm sure there's going to be new partnerships and things that you're going to be probably starting to expand into. And so how can we find you on social media, on the web?
Yeah, my DMs are open. Best way to contact me is on Twitter at CXY or CXY. Actually, I'm pretty much CXY everywhere. Okay. So just find me there.
Okay. Awesome. All right, CY. Well, great to spend time with you, and we'll do a part 2 at some point.
Love it. Thanks.
Okay. See you later.